Welcome back, everyone, to another fabulous episode of Healthcare Trailblazers. Very happy to be sitting here today with the wonderful Ohad Arazi. Ohad hails from the Holy Land of Israel and currently lives in Vancouver, Canada. Sorry about that. It is what it is. Okay. I lived in Toronto for 10 years, so I can say that. No, beautiful place. Ohad is the CEO of a really interesting company in the handheld ultrasound space, really a market leader. Excited to talk about it, called Clarius. And also an overachiever, like many people on this podcast. He's a lawyer, started his tech career, then went back to Harvard. So lots of interesting stops. I think there's a lot to learn from here. Ohad, thanks so much for stopping by today.
Thanks so much, Mendel. It's an absolute pleasure.
Wonderful. All right, so let's jump all the way back. You're a young man growing up in Israel. What did you start in healthcare? Was it technology? Walk us through your first kind of career steps.
Yeah, I started my tech career in the military, actually, which is not an uncommon thread, I think, for many Israelis. I was in one of the elite technology units in the intelligence corps, a unit called 8200. And I was there as an officer. And following my service, I joined a startup company that was founded by a bunch of guys from my unit and was kind of employee number 4, ultimately led the company, which we sold at the end of 2005. And then subsequent to that, I moved to Vancouver. My wife's a Vancouverite. She dragged me kicking and screaming here at first, but I've grown to love it. It's very different, as you can imagine, from the tech scene in Israel, but it's fabulous. And yeah, this is home now.
How's it different? What are some of those contrasting vibes that you've got?
Yeah, Israel is just this amazing mecca of ambition and passion. It's a very small space with a very intense tech sector. I feel like everyone in Israel has a plan to change the world. Like literally your cab driver will say, hey, do you have a moment? You're in tech. Can I show you this business plan I have on how to change the world? And you're like, okay, yeah, maybe that would work. I might invest actually, right? Vancouver is different. It's much more laid back. I think that historically, Vancouver always had a very strong tech scene, but it was really focused on small companies, which is not dissimilar to where Israel was. But what happened in Israel is that many founders exited and then they started their second company, their third. They really built an ecosystem that's kind of like self-reciprocating. And that ultimately also brought a lot of headquarters. And Vancouver's not there yet. We're still at the stage of smaller companies here and usually kind of one and done exits, which is actually why I was so compelled to join Clarius. Clarius was founded by a guy called Laurent Pellissier. This is his second ultrasound company. He sold his last company in 2013, used the capital to reinvest, build this next organization. And it's been fabulous to partner with him and grow it. And I think that's the kind of mid-stage, high growth scale ups that we need to see here. And I think we'll see that over time, just like we did in Tel Aviv.
Incredible. So before we jump into Clarius and all that, let's go back to some of those stops because you've had some interesting stops along your journey. I saw some of the highlights. I saw Change Healthcare seems to be for quite a while, like 10, 11 years, something like that. So big company there, and then various stops, and then again you became a lawyer, and you're actually the second lawyer turned healthcare executive to be on this podcast. And it seems that it helps a lot in the day-to-day. It wasn't obviously wasted time in school. So let's start there. How do you find that your law career is helping you in the day-to-day when it comes to the healthcare space?
Yeah, that's a really astute observation, I'd say, Mendel, because I think it's uncommon for someone to go through all the rigors of a law degree and all the pain of passing the bar and then to choose not to practice. But I actually feel that it did really move along my career. I already had a tech background from the military. So when I finished my service, I was interested to go into law school. I was already running a company, so it's kind of hard to juggle a lot of things at the same time. And yet, I kind of stuck with it, finished the law career or finished the law degree. And I think it has shaped some of how I think about business. I think there's a very high degree of pragmatism that comes with being a lawyer. And I think that lends itself well to just finding ways to agree or finding ways to move forward in business negotiations or in thinking about risk. And so, yeah, I started in startups. And then when I moved here, I joined McKesson, which later became Change Healthcare. I was there for 11 years. And that was an amazing experience. McKesson, when I was there, was this 186-year-old company with a huge focus on healthcare. It's a Fortune 5 company. And I feel we had all of the benefits being up here in Vancouver. This is where the medical imaging business was headquartered. So it's not core to McKesson's business. McKesson is principally a drug distribution business. And so we were kind of, removed from the core, but that gave us a lot of autonomy. It kind of all the benefits of being part of a huge corporate organization with an amazing channel to get at any healthcare CEO, any provider in the US. And yet they kind of left us to our own. We were high growth. We were spinning a lot of margin back to the company and taking good care of our customers. So was there for 11 years. McKesson ultimately divested its technology business units to change healthcare. And I stayed on for my initial retention period, and then joined another Canadian company actually called TELUS. And TELUS is one of, I think, the second largest telco in Canada, but it also is a very big digital health business, which is pretty unique because many telcos over the years have dabbled in healthcare, and very few have had the staying power to really build a business there. And I served as chief strategy officer. I ran the EMR business unit, that's electronic medical records. Was there for 3 years, but after 15 years of being a big corporate guy, which I never thought of myself as one, but I guess the numbers don't lie. And I was this, I just felt the need to kind of roll my sleeves back up and come back to my startup roots. And just before the millennium, the pandemic broke out in early 2020, I joined an Israeli startup company called Zebra Medical, which was an imaging AI company funded by Coastal Ventures, J&J Ventures, Intermountain Health Ventures. Really interesting technology, how to use medical images to automatically diagnose, or how to use artificial intelligence to automatically diagnose medical images. And had a great run. Ultimately, that company was sold in early 2021. And then subsequent to that, I joined Clarius.
That's really cool. So let's kind of digress for a second, because this is something I talked about briefly a couple episodes back with the former dean of Harvard Medical School, Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, incredible guy. Let's talk about AI in healthcare. You have actual real life experience with it. How do you see AI impacting healthcare? And it seems like there's actually some pretty incredible things that it can do that's just way beyond obviously what we can do when it comes to diagnosing and even preventive care and catching things early and being able to watch certain patterns. So talk about that a little bit. What is the implications of AI in healthcare to you?
Yeah, and with AI in healthcare, because there's been so much focus on it, so much energy behind it, I think it's important to separate the hype from the reality. The hype is certainly there from the perspective of, healthcare is a data-rich domain, and that will lend itself well to pattern recognition, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Where we're at, though, is far from being able to remove the physician from the equation. And I don't think we'll ever want to get there. I think about AI in healthcare more like the autopilot in a long transatlantic flight, right? If I'm flying from Vancouver to Tel Aviv, it's a very long flight. I'm much more comfortable knowing that there's a pilot there, but I'm happy to know that that pilot is supported by AI, so that or by the autopilot, right? So that some of the more mundane tasks and the routine activities can be offset. I think of it the same way. There's a very famous quote about AI in medical imaging, which is that AI will not replace radiologists. Radiologists that use AI will replace radiologists that don't. And so that's how I think about artificial intelligence in all of healthcare, specifically in medical imaging. I think we've moved on again from that initial promise or that initial fear maybe of we're trying to take radiologists out of the equation. That's not the case, but rather how can we augment and complement them? Still a long journey to go. The principal use of AI in medical imaging today the principal uses I'd say are two: either to help guide better image acquisition, and that's mostly what we do in ultrasound, basically use pattern recognition and AI to help optimize the view. Ultrasound images are pretty difficult to acquire, and therefore you need machine learning, especially in the hands of novice users, to be able to get high quality images so they can automatically detect the anatomy and kind of show you how to position the probe in the right way. So that's one area, and that's really unique to ultrasound. For many of the other modalities, so X-ray, CT, MRI, mammography, much of the focus is on triaging, so having an initial read of the image before a radiologist looks at it, or otherwise detecting part of the anatomy to simplify the interpretation process done by the radiologist. So it's more of a productivity tool.
Interesting. Okay. So you don't necessarily see any uses past optimization. It actually recognizing something, a pattern that possibly even a doctor with the best education could never see. You don't necessarily see that application.
I don't know that it will really replace the radiologist on complex reads. I think that AI will have a role over time and actually more of, again, that autopilot concept. So I described where we are today, which is either guidance or triage, kind of like a productivity aid. I think what will
Yeah.
go in the not too distant future is be able to rule out simpler procedures. Just to be
Hmm.
clear, right now, the FDA is only approving the use of AI in medical imaging as decision support. It's called CAD, computer aided diagnostics. And that means
Okay.
that the AI cannot automatically rule out a condition. But I think that that will be the next breakthrough that are for simpler types of exams. And probably the best example in my mind is chest x-rays. Chest x-rays are very normal. They're taken in many inpatient wards, and the vast majority of them don't have significant findings. And so instead of taking the time for a radiologist, which, with all of their training and expertise, are probably better suited to interpreting much more complex images like, neuro CTs or complex fusion exams, many radiologists spend their day reading, plain x-rays, which I think an AI could do very well. But we'll have to see a breakthrough first with the FDA clearing the AI to do a rule out on its own, meaning that your x-ray, when you're sitting in an inpatient ward, maybe with a suspected pneumonia, your x-ray will not be read by a human. Only the machine will read it and say, hey, we've looked at Mendel's x-ray. There's no significant findings here. You can send him home. Now, that's a pretty big jump, not just technology-wise, but I think we have to think about other implications, like, for example, medical liability, risk, right? For example, if your exam was misinterpreted by a radiologist, you'd have some recourse. But if that was interpreted by a machine, who's liable? Who's accountable? Was
Yeah.
it the developer that wrote the code, the person that implemented the system, the CIO that made the purchase for the AI? There's still questions there to resolve that are not only technology driven.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. To aggregate data, to collect data, and enable the actual doctor to make a better decision rather than AI just going around making decisions. All right, let's talk about Clarius. How did you come? So pandemic comes. You're working for the startup in Israel. Where's the transition between that and Clarius? Did they find you? You found them? What was the love story there?
Yeah, after Zebra Medical was sold, I had the opportunity for a change, and I was doing some board work here, and through that, got to know Laurent Pellissier, who's the founder of Clarius. I've always loved ultrasound. It's this amazing modality. It's safe to use. It's non-ionizing, and I think it really has the potential to deliver equitable access to care at a global level. And when I got to know the founder, Laurent, and I heard about what he was doing, and I heard about this amazing device he was developing, I was immediately hooked. Right? I mean, if you look at this amazing innovation of that Clarius has developed, it's the size of a smartphone. It costs under $3,500, and yet it's a full-fledged ultrasound machine with a quality output that is comparable to the cart-based systems you may have seen at the hospital. Now you can appreciate.
Okay, so sorry. Take a giant step back. We're for the complete novices. What is the evolution in that technology to go from the giant clunky machines that we're all used to this handheld device? Is it the same technology? Is it completely different? Walk us through it.
Yeah, so at Clarius, we're on a mission to make accurate, easy to use, and affordable ultrasound tools available to all medical professionals across multiple specialty areas. And ultrasound really started in radiology, cardiology, somewhat in obstetrics, with these conventional cart-based systems. So you may have seen them, kind of bigger machines with a lot of knobs and buttons and cables, and they have very high quality images. But obviously they're kind of clunky to use, and they require a very high degree of proficiency. That's the main thing, is that most ultrasound usage is driven by a 2-year technology degree, which is called a sonographer. Sonographer is responsible for acquiring the images, and then later they're interpreted usually by a radiologist or cardiologist or by an obstetrics doctor. That's kind of the conventional approach to ultrasound. About
Okay.
20 years ago, we started to see our first inflection point, which is the introduction of what was called point of care ultrasound. And that brought ultrasound into a smaller form factor. It looked more like a laptop that was a little bit more portable. And that also made ultrasound available in a few new hospital departments. For example, emergency medicine, anesthesiology, critical care, MSK, somewhat in plastic surgery. It's still a cart like that you wheel around, but it certainly was more portable. And then let's fast forward to roughly 2013, 2014, and that's our next
Hmm.
main inflection point. That's really where handheld ultrasound came onto the scene. That's when Clarius was founded, and that's also the time frame that a few of our competitors came in. And
So you guys were there right in the beginning.
right in the beginning, again, we were founded by someone that had already built a point of care ultrasound, a compact, and he really had the vision on how do you further miniaturize it and how do you make it much more accessible. And to me, that's really the name of the game, is access, right? With handheld ultrasound, you can see this is much more of a personal device, right? It's not like a departmental asset that you have to book or that you wheel around, but rather it's always there. It's always in your pocket, and it allows you to make decisions or drive interventions right at the bedside, at the point of care. And that is, I think, the biggest trend that we're undergoing in healthcare, right? Is the movement from the hub, the hospital, to the spokes, where the patients are on a daily basis in their homes, in the offices of their specialists or their practitioners, in a variety of care settings, which are much less costly and provide much earlier intervention or earlier diagnosis. And that's really the promise of handheld ultrasound.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I have a friend here locally, a doctor named Dr. Saul. Shout out to Dr. Saul. And he has a fascination with these handheld devices. He's been testing a couple of them. It seems Clarius is very strong. So I actually have a specific interest for him in this space. But yeah, like it was just randomly. Like I was at his house. And he was just testing it out, and so I actually got an actual experience of it, and it was really interesting. You could just pull it out. It connects to your phone, right? I believe via Bluetooth, or how does it connect
Wi-Fi,
to your phone?
yeah. So it launches
Wi-Fi.
Bluetooth at first to find other devices it can tether to, and then once it establishes it, or once it finds one, it establishes a Wi-Fi connection with either a tablet or a phone, iOS, Android. And the thing is, actually, with our device, the Bluetooth, so the wireless module is built in. So it has its own Wi-Fi router, which means it's not dependent on the hospital network. Sometimes you're in a care setting where you don't have a network, like an ambulance, and therefore it's fully contained but still fully wireless.
Very cool. Yeah. So he pulled out his phone, and he was showing me all my organs. Apparently, I'm missing a kidney. Probably should have rethought that trip to Mexico,
There
but
you go.
hey, it's what it is. And it was really interesting. But to kind of tie that back to a point that you mentioned about, there's an evolution of care going a lot closer to the patient,
Hmm.
right? So obviously, with the advance of telehealth from the pandemic, and various companies coming out with ways of basically putting things in the patient's home that the doctor can monitor. At Proviva Health Group, we have obviously a remote patient monitoring program where we're sending out blood pressure cuffs and scales, and glucose monitors, and various cellularly enabled devices that just automatically input the readings back to the doctor's office for us to monitor. So there's a lot of that going on, and it would seem that this would follow with that trend. What application do you see, or is there an application in the advance of home-based, not home health, because that's a whole different space, but the home-based health, concierge health? The idea of doctors now going out, or enabling patients to do certain things from their home. Is there any application for that here, or at the end of the day, is this something that,
There absolutely is,
yeah,
Mendel.
what do you
Yeah,
think?
and so I talked about the form factor and the price point as being major enablers that increase access to a much larger potential base of users, but ultimately to put this in the hands of many more medical professionals and ultimately in the hands of patients, we really had to make ultrasound much easier to use. And that's where I think the secret ingredient is the software and is the AI to drive that guidance, right? That really makes it as
Mm,
easy to use as point and click, because the AI can help to automatically detect the anatomy. It can help you position the probe the right way. If you've ever had an ultrasound, and it sounds like you recently did, right, you can appreciate that it does take quite a high degree of proficiency to be able to acquire those images. And so I'd say, first of all, to just think about home-based use cases, we have to kind of overcome that breakthrough of really powering these incredible hardware devices with software. And that's actually why we launched a SaaS subscription, which provides users with access to all of our AI. And we have 7 specialty packs that focus on specific use cases that are all AI driven. Now, in terms of being able to access this in different care settings, I'd say that, you touch on this with COVID, equitable access to care is one of the largest challenges that I say society is facing. And then COVID, to your point, has further exacerbated that problem because it's increased pressures on systems that were stretched by the shrinking numbers of healthcare practitioners. And that's also coupled with the growing cost of care, right, as a reliance, over-reliance maybe on hospital-intensive procedures and large capital purchases of big box systems. And so therefore, I think that smaller AI or software-driven solutions that could be used by less experienced users is what's going to kind of break through that hospital-centric approach. We've seen some initial patient-centered use cases emerge. It's important to qualify that all of ultrasound today is regulated by the FDA. So our device is also a Class 2 FDA medical device. And the FDA has not cleared yet any ultrasound use with the patient as the intended user, meaning it still has to be driven or used by a licensed medical professional. But we are involved in a few clinical trials that are showcasing early capabilities of being able to put this in the hands of patients. And actually, one I'd love to tell you about is what we're doing with a partner company of ours called Turtle Health. And so Turtle Health do virtual fertility testing and virtual fertility treatments. And as part of that, they try to optimize the timing of the treatment to the woman's ovulation cycle. And so under this clinical trial, they send our ultrasound scanners to the patient's home. The women perform a transvaginal exam to be able to measure the antral follicles. That's an indication of their ovulation cycle. And it's remotely overseen by sonographers through a real-time collaboration tool that we have built into the device. It's right now being rolled out as a clinical trial across the Mayo Health System. And I think it could be one of the early breakthroughs where the patient will be licensed or accredited to use ultrasound at home, perhaps still being overread in real time or guided by a licensed practitioner.
Isn't that cool? That's really cool. I have to say, I stopped my last question mid-sentence because I was saying if patients can do this, and I thought to myself, that's a stupid question. Patients can't do this. No way. It's a bunch of black and white on a screen, and there's no way for me, unless I have the proper education, to differentiate between what's my heart and what's my liver and what's my spine or brain. So the fact that you are actually going there is actually probably a massive breakthrough, I'd imagine.
It is, and you're right though. It can't be open-ended, and I think that's the historical challenge of trying to envision this, even in the hands of GPs. GPs don't have a lot of time, even if they have the training. They're spending like your primary care doctor is spending 8 to 10 minutes with you on per visit. And so to imagine that they spend maybe the first 7 minutes talking about your sore throat, and then they're going to kind of look at their clock and say, look, we've got about 90 seconds. Mendel, why don't you lie down? I'll do a full abdominal scan and try to see if I can diagnose any cysts on your liver. That's very unlikely to happen because the PCP would first of all have to take on a lot of liability for doing a full diagnostic. If they were really concerned about anything with your liver, they would refer you to the gold standard, which is radiology. But in more of a closed loop environment where they're looking at a specific condition, maybe you have congestive heart failure, and they're tracking the disease progression of that makes a lot more sense in a primary care or a family office setting. And of course, then it will have to be enabled by AI so that they're not doing a full diagnostic, but rather they're maybe doing 4 lines across your chest. The AI is quantifying the degree of interstitial lung fluid that's around your heart and using that as a basis for pegging you on a trend line to know, is your congestive heart failure getting better or worse? And that's, by the way, much better than the gold standard for CHF today, which is using an electronic scale.
Interesting. Yeah. So this might sound super elementary, but just on a practical level, from someone that is not doing this on a day-to-day, I would imagine that one of the biggest barriers to people that are not educated as doctors to doing this would be obviously recognizing what's what in this giant mass of black and white blurbs going on the screen. You know how like they do these days those creepy 3D images of babies?
Yes.
So is your kind of AI going that direction where it can post produce an act like an image that makes sense to someone that knows maybe what a heart looks like when it looks more like a heart rather than just a blurb?
I'd say I think of this as two phases. The first is still living in what is predominantly a two-dimensional world, which is
Mm-hmm.
what most ultrasound images are like. And I think to your point, it kind of looks like a variety of shades of gray and blobs. But that will be the first point where you're really driving pattern recognition using AI, because the AI will tell you what organ you're looking at and will draw a polygon around it or will accentuate the view. I'll give you an example. An area we're very active in is orthopedic surgery and pain management. As an alternative to prescribing narcotics, we're seeing kind of the pain management space move towards image guided therapies. So basically, very pointed injections of pain medication, let's say into my rotator cuff, right, where I might have an injury. And so it's very precise work, and kind of envision, with one hand, you're holding the ultrasound, in another, a needle, and you're driving that needle and injecting it close to the nerve bundle to be able to manage the pain locally without needing to prescribe a broader narcotic. Now, that
Wow.
can be done today by orthopedic surgeons, which are very well trained at it. But we're seeing an increasing a number of users that can also perform these procedures if they have the right kind of tool from an ultrasound perspective to superpower them. That can include, physiatrists, sports medicine doctors, even chiropractors in the US are licensed to perform these injections. But of course, they're
Hmm.
not anywhere as experienced as an orthopedic surgeon in doing it. And
Right.
that's why we
But that's
created an AI feature that is a needle enhanced, meaning so we automatically detect the needle, like to your point of the 3D baby equivalent, to make it very easy to see the needle. And we also enhance the view of the anatomy. We optimize the contrast
wow.
so you can see the nerve bundle more clearly. So it's not a 3D image, but yet it just really makes it pop. So even for a relatively novice user, you know exactly where
Right.
you are.
That's amazing. That's huge in my very uneducated opinion. That's massive. Anything that's going to take people away from like you said narcotics and being able to be a lot more precise. That's incredible. And I might be wrong, but I think I remember my doctor friend talking about a usage with even in the emergency room being able to very quickly check for internal bleeding. Um, is that am I remembering that correctly?
Absolutely, and that's a big part of it. Is in an emergency room setting when you're using ultrasound or handheld ultrasound, you really don't have a lot of time to fiddle and optimize the view of the controls. You really need to be point and shoot. And so there's a standard protocol that happens in emergency medicine, which is called a fast or an e-fast exam, where you're basically roaming through the main organ systems, looking for trauma, looking for bleeding, looking for loose fluid. And
Hmm.
our AI actually, as you move it, we have a feature called auto preset AI, which as you move from organ to organ, it will automatically detect that organ and optimize the view for that, which makes it a lot easier to see. You can appreciate that, um, your spleen versus your heart versus your lungs have a different depth of field, have a different shape. And without AI to automatically optimize that view, you would have to fiddle with the controls yourself. And so I think it's a very powerful feature. It also automates
Wow.
part of what you would otherwise do, which is like, for example, to measure the volume in the bladder if you're trying to insert a catheter, or look at the ejection fraction, which is an output of the heart. It's an indication of the flow of the heart. So the more we can automate measures like that, it will further enable the use of ultrasound, even with less experience or less skilled users.
Wow. Well, I know we're coming up on time, and I think we can probably continue to chat for a long time because it's really fascinating, and it sounds like you guys are really, I mean, obviously on the cutting edge. You were there from the beginning of this evolution, and clearly a very strong market leader. So, really incredible work. How can either a single doc or systems, what are your various customer bases, and how can they get their hands on this handheld ultrasound?
Yeah, about 75% of our business is selling into physician offices. So I think we're replacing much of the legacy approach for medical device sales, where it was kind of like capital purchases done by big hospital systems. It's much more accessible now. So we sell, mostly into physician offices where
Hmm.
practitioners or doctors are looking to bring it into their practice. Much of our business is sold online, so it's much more of a B2C purchase. You can go to our website, clarius.com. and look at all the tools that we have. It's under $3,500 for the device for most of
Wow.
our devices. It's also supported with a subscription that gives you access.
And sorry, what did those gigantic carts used to cost,
They will
or still
go
cost?
from anywhere from 120 to $150,000 per system.
Wow. So just to give people that that reference point, that's
It
amazing.
is. It's really changed, and I'd say that we're the only handheld vendor that has image quality that's comparable to that of the compact or of the cart systems. And so a lot of our business isn't just novice users. Actually, is replacing traditional carts, both in hospital departments and also in physician offices where they had already made those purchases. But basically, you can buy it online, and of course, we'd be happy to support you with any of our sales reps to go through a demo or provide educational content. A big part of actually how we're shaping this market is with education. We do multiple webinars each month and really try to inspire new practitioners to bring imaging into their practice by showing them how it's done and having our KOLs talk about their experience of bringing ultrasound into their practice.
Incredible. Well, Ohad, thanks again for spending time with us today. It really is genuinely interesting to hear about this. Like I said, sounds like incredible work. I've seen some of the real life applications personally, and yeah, for everyone listening, there'll be links here, there, and everywhere. As far you can learn more about Ohad and Clarius. Ohad, thanks for spending the time.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Mandel. I really enjoyed our time together.